I want to start this video off with an apology, not just to LazerPig, but to the entirety of both our audiences regarding the tone of my original response. It was absolutely unprofessional, and my focus should have been entirely on the actual information within the original video. I am truly sorry for doing that. I also want to add a thank you to the Chieftain for his video on the subject. Not because I think it supports my side, but because it greatly helped me to calm down and not have a repeat of that happen with this video. While I sincerely apologize for my tone in the video, I found the way that LazerPig chose to respond to my video to be considerably more hostile and unprofessional. Additionally, his response contained not only inaccuracies regarding the information presented, but misleading claims regarding me and Red Effect. This has left us with basically no alternative other than to respond not just for our own sake, but for all of you watching who are not hearing the full story. With all the confusion surrounding this situation, I do not expect you to agree with everything that I say. However, I must stress that I will not be defending the Armata, nor have I done so previously. I do ask you to please give me the benefit of watching through the entirety of this video, as I feel it is only fair to listen to both sides before drawing conclusions about me based on one video. If I say anything in this video you think I am incorrect on, I will have a comprehensive list of sources in the description for you to thoroughly investigate. Before I address individual points made in LP's video, I want to include the section from my original video in its entirety so that those who have not seen it or are just now tuning into this situation have the full context of what I said. If you have already seen it, I will include a timestamp to skip past it. Alright, so these comments are clearly coming from people who watched the video LazerPig made on the T-14 Armata, as in that video he refers to the engine used in the Armata as being a copy of the one in the Porsche Tiger.
And in their brilliance that could only possibly come to a bunch of people high on mountain air and vodka, decided just to copy the German SLA-16. You know, the engine from the Second World War Nazi tank the Porsche Tiger. There had been considerable studies of the engine, and a Russian modified version of it now existed, which was the version of the engine Ural had chosen. The problem was, this version of the engine they wanted, the A85-3, had been built to power oil compressing and pumping stations, not heavy vehicles. The engine had been a complete commercial failure. No one wanted it because, surprise surprise, it was unreliable.
This is not only completely wrong, but would have been extremely easy to fact-check by one of the experts he has claimed fact-check his videos before posting. This probably wouldn't have annoyed me as much if it weren't for the fact that this occurred right after I had just spent well over a week working on my Tiger P video. I understand that the T-14 being a newer vehicle makes it harder to research as less information is declassified about it, but that does not excuse lazy sourcing. Before I get too far off track though, let's actually dissect the error in his statement. The engine used by the T-14 Armata is the A85-3A diesel engine, or as it is also referred to as the Chelyabinsk 12N360. Unlike many other diesels, this engine uses a less common X-shaped piston configuration. This is far different from the twin V10 petrol engines which powered the electric drives of the Porsche Tiger. What he is confusing this with is the completely separate project of the Porsche SLA-16 diesel engine, which was eventually tested on a Jagdtiger hull along with one standard Tiger II being modified to accept the engine. However, installation was never completed. Side note, but yes LazerPig, we do know what they mean by hunting tiger. Seriously man, do some actual research. One of the sources he cites below the video does claim that the A85-3A was built using the technology of the German SLA-16, and I can't really find enough information to disprove that completely, but I think it's worth considering a few things before we make that claim. For one thing, the T-14's engine is a 12-cylinder, whereas the SLA-16 is, as the name suggests, a 16-cylinder engine. Obviously, this number could have been reduced for a new engine, but this alone proves it isn't just a copy. Next, we can consider that the SLA-16 had a displacement of 36.6 liters compared to the 34.6 of the A85-3A, which is a fairly small change if it were to be a copy of the SLA-16 with 4 pistons lopped off. This would indicate a completely different piston size, engine bore diameter, or a combination of the two to achieve this displacement. Really, outside of this similarity in shape and being diesel engines, this is where the connections between these two engines seem to stop as far as online sources go. It seems that the multiple articles which tout this history all reference another article on topwar.ru which simply says it was based on the SLA-16 with no further information and no sources listed. One of the other sources he lists on the video claims the engine was under development for 2 decades with the intention of being used on a tank with no mention of the Porsche engine or it being used for another purpose. Odd that he didn't give any mention of this in his video. Only one article seems to mention its use for pumping, and once again the article lists no sources, but it does bear a striking similarity to what he says in his video regarding the engine. Is it possible the Soviets and later the Russians continued work on Porsche's engine and just now decided to use it? Sure, the Red Army captured a ton of German technology, same as the Allies. Reportedly, this included the previously mentioned Jagdtiger fitted with the experimental engine as well as documents pertaining to it. What they did with that information is not clear. The T-14 is certainly not the super tank Russia makes it out to be, but I have a hard time believing that they would copy an 80-year-old engine for their brand new tank. Taking a step back, this may all seem trivial to many of you, and you aren't entirely wrong, as at the end of the day, that error isn't going to cause anyone to die or anything crazy. That being said though, these sorts of errors are what cause long-standing myths within the community, especially when the video they are in garners well over 2.5 million views. The fact that I have received several comments about this on my own video shows how quickly misinformation like this can spread. We all make errors from time to time, but it is your responsibility as a creator who is making edutainment style content to make sure that information is as accurate as possible, and that means not just using sources, but also your common sense. Now, am I saying to never watch LazerPig or channels like his again? No. I personally do not care for his content and the clear inherent bias he puts into many of them, but if you enjoy it, by all means watch it. Honestly, you should never trust any information in any video regardless of the creator at face value. Never be afraid to do your own research. Now that we have seen my original response, let us now go over LazerPig's response point by point. I will try to keep this as brief as I can, but in an effort to ensure that all the context is included, I will be showing most of the section regarding me within his video. To start with, let's look at his claim of my channel being dead and the response being an attempt at clout chasing.
It's an urban legend that never happened.
But the thing is, his rebuttal of me was one of his more successful videos. He got a lot of clicks, and some other YouTubers decided, hey, there's money to be made here. Oh boy, I wonder where I'm going with this. This is ConeOfArc, a YouTuber whose view numbers have been lacking lately.
I would not have included this section if it weren't for the insistence from LazerPig that all of this has been done as a way to farm clout. My channel has not been struggling, as you can see from the steady growth it has continued to receive, as well as the majority of my videos this year performing on average or well above average. Yes, it is true I had a few lower performing videos, but these were ones that were either incredibly niche topics or ones which are far from my normal content. The claim I only did this for clout is simply incorrect, and I don't really understand the insistence on that being the reason behind me making my video. One of my biggest goals with my content is to help set the record straight on a variety of myths which have become widespread regarding different tanks. So when I saw people beginning to come over to my channel parroting LazerPig's statement that
decided just to copy the German SLA-16. You know, the engine from the Second World War Nazi tank, the Porsche Tiger.
I saw the potential for a new myth to begin spreading and wanted to take the opportunity to try and address it. I specifically chose to do so within my comments video in order to not make an entire video targeting LazerPig over what is, in fairness, only a small part of his entire video. I am of the belief that drama is not a beneficial way to grow a channel, so this claim that I was only doing this response for that reason is just not the case. A look through my channel's history should be enough to show that I don't go around clout chasing, preferring to stick to making normal content. Some may try to accuse me of only making this video in an effort to continue farming views from the drama, but again, this is not the case. The time I spent working on this video would absolutely have been better spent working on a Cursed by Design video, and the drama will not result in additional views I couldn't get with other content. The irony of this entire statement about me is it implies I had seen RedEffect's video, which I actually was completely unaware of until I was already editing my response, so it by no means was the inspiration for me making my video. Enough about that though, let's move on to our next point.
Thanks to being flooded with comments, Cone got angry and went on a rant where he talked about how the engine from the T-14 Armata is not the one from the Porsche Tiger. It may in fact be the one from the Yak Tiger. And as you may be aware, which of the over-related, unreliable and generally useless tanks the Soviets pulled the SLA-16 engine out of is the single most important fact in history and utterly changes the entire context of the video. This is why it was so important this YouTuber call me out and imply that I am a liar, an idiot, and a purveyor of disinformation in front of his entire fan base. So I'm sorry. I guess this YouTuber noticed I got the name of the tank wrong. Except I didn't. Because if we look at the blog he got these pictures of the SLA-16 engine from, it actually talks about how the engine started life as an engine for the Porsche Tiger. Alright, the Mark II, not the Mark I. Porsche believed that air-cooled diesel engine Tigers would strongly benefit the desert campaign, but because the tank was cancelled, the target tank for this engine was switched to something else.
Now we get into his argument against my criticism, starting with the part on the Porsche Tiger. Unfortunately, rather than simply admitting this was a mistake, LazerPig attempts to shift the goalpost by stating that he was actually right due to it being proposed for the Porsche Tiger using one of the sources I provided to try and prove this. The vehicle being referred to in this highlighted section is not the Porsche Tiger, it is in fact a later design known as the Tiger P2, or more commonly the VK4502P, which you can see in the screenshot within his video. He does address this, but only to hand wave it away as if it is not an issue. On its face, this may seem like a minor thing, but these two vehicles are not only entirely different, but the 4502 was never fully completed with only 3 hulls constructed. Given that neither the Porsche Tiger nor the VK4502P ever mounted the SLA-16, mentioning them in a video about it is misleading and frankly unnecessary. The strange thing is, he does say himself that this was never done, so why bother bringing it up? It certainly doesn't prove I was wrong, nor does it prove that LazerPig was right. It doesn't even make sense for the original point he was trying to make in his Armada video about the engine of the Armada being unreliable, as since none of these engines were anything more than prototypes, they could not be famously unreliable. It is true that the Porsche Tiger is known for being unreliable, but this same thing cannot be said for the 4502P, which never got far enough to garner that sort of reputation. All of what I have just detailed makes this whole argument irrelevant in regards to the Armada. This leads me to my next point.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
One was installed into a Yak Tiger, which was later captured by the Soviets, so you're right, you needed to call me out on that because of all those comments you got from my fans spreading disinformation. All 3 of them. Did you forget I can check? But hey, you're right, it's really important that these 3 people learn that it was the Yak Tiger the engine came from, not anything else. Except, that's not quite true. In fact, would it surprise you to learn this entire blog post and subsequently almost all the information about the SLA-16 engine posted online is complete bullshit? Well no, that wouldn't be fair to say complete bullshit, but there is a fair bit wrong with it. Anyway, the only source they cite which seems to talk about the SLA-16 is Professor Porsche's Wars by Carl Ludvigsen. Here's my copy. of which they seem to have used just for the pictures. In the book, Ludvigsen explains how the engine came to be, how Albert Speer refused to take Porsche seriously, and how Simmering was brought in to help Porsche make a new engine to be the modular do-anything engine for whatever tank was the Nazi buzzword of the day. Misquotes from this book have made it into almost every blog that has ever spoken about the SLA-16, hence why what tank it was designed for changes depending on who you ask, from the Tiger II to the Maus to the Low and beyond. Essentially, whatever tank Hitler thought was going to win the war this week. 5 engines were completed, and 1 was installed onto a King Tiger, not as Arc claims, a Jagdtiger.
But yes, LazerPig, we do know what they mean by hunting tiger. Seriously, man, do some actual research.
The claims for this were made by the other co-author of those live journal posts. In another live journal post, he disputes the SLA-16 could never fit into King Tiger by cross-referencing the engine bay of the King Tiger with the engine plans, showing it couldn't possibly fit.
We now get into what appears to be the main attack that LazerPig makes regarding both my research ethics and my credibility. The problem is, ironically, from what research I have done, he appears to either be cherry-picking sources to give the impression I am wrong, or he has simply not checked more than one source. According to the book he cites, Professor Porsche's Wars, the engine was indeed mounted in a King Tiger. However, just in the section on the SLA-16 alone, the book contains an error where it incorrectly labels a drawing of the Jagdtiger with the standard HL230 engine as one with the SLA-16. This graphic on screen now shows the identifiable differences between the two which allow us to make this conclusion. Pay close attention to the air filters and vents which are different between the SLA-16 and the HL230. You can see they match up with the HL230 on screen, and not the SLA-16. This is a minor mistake, but it doesn't end there, as if we take a peek through some of the sources listed in this book, it cites other books which instead say it was mounted in a Jagdtiger. This still wasn't good enough for me, so I reached out to several well-known historians who agreed it was a Jagdtiger and pointed me towards a book which supposedly includes a photo of this mounting. I was able to purchase this book as well as find the original photo, but could not locate the original source of the photo. That being said, I found a number of documents as well as secondhand sources stating it was indeed a Jagdtiger which received the engine, including original German sources. So this begs the question, was I actually wrong in my video? From all the information I can find, it appears fairly conclusive that a Jagdtiger did receive the SLA-16 as I originally stated. This is supported by the variety of other historians who have written on this subject and have had access to further sources I do not. If LazerPig has further information regarding it being mounted in a standard King Tiger, I highly recommend he share it, as it could be information which has not been widely circulated and could add additional information regarding this engine's history. The way LazerPig argues this point, though, is extremely misleading. The part of my response video he points to where I am talking about the hunting tiger was not actually in reference to the original Armada video itself, but rather to a reply from LazerPig on a Reddit post regarding that video where he makes the claim we do not know what the hunting tiger referenced actually was. This is where my now infamous line of "do some actual research" comes in. Not in relation to his Armada video, but because I was so annoyed that he acted as if we didn't know what a hunting tiger is, despite it being essentially the literal translation of Jagdtiger. Was I justified in the way that I reacted to this in the video? No, I do not believe I was. I believe this does add some missing context which his response lacked, though. The thing is, despite all of this, none of this information truly matters for this argument, as it does not change the fact that in his original video he states it was the famously unreliable Tiger P which the engine originated from. Even had I been wrong about the Tiger II variant, which I think I have demonstrated I was not, it would be irrelevant to the rest of my argument. As information in books can vary, I could have overlooked this if it weren't for what he says next.
You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
When it comes to a lot of the critique that I get, it's typically made by people who almost exclusively do all their research online, and there is this huge, and I mean huge, disconnect between the information you get online versus what you find published in more academic sources, by which I don't mean LiveJournal. So if you do all your research online, like Cone and Red do, you inevitably end up repeating false information or falling victim to woozles.
Although this statement when I first watched it, and even now, makes me immensely angry, I can somewhat understand why he might think this is the case if he does not watch my content. In my response video, I do indeed only use online sources, and this was to some degree a mistake. The problem with this accusation of me only using online sources is that on LazerPig's Armada video, that is all he cites as his sources or references. Obviously, in a video criticizing a point he made, I would use his sources as well as others which backed up my arguments. You can certainly criticize that I should have done further research, and I regret not doing so looking back, as it could have helped avoid this whole situation. However, to then make the generalization that I only use online sources for all my videos is just a flat-out lie. I use a variety of sources for my videos, including original archive documents, books, and online sources to form the scripts for my videos. This is abundantly clear by looking at the description of my videos or even just watching them, as I regularly show snippets of the documents on screen. In the earlier days of my content, I was not as experienced with researching, so I did rely too heavily on online sources and made a number of mistakes because of it. This is no longer the case though, so I view this claim as nothing more than an attempt to discredit me, especially when he follows this up with an appeal to authority regarding the Armada video by the Tank Museum. This drama has already spread enough, so I don't want to pull Bovington into it further, but as he brings this up, I will say that they should not be treated as an authoritative source on this particular subject. Bovington does not have an Armada in their collection, and they almost certainly do not have considerably more information to go on than we do. They may provide good insights on some vehicles, but having access to a tank collection does not instantly make them a primary source on all tank-related topics. This is especially the case given they do not cite their sources on the Armada video. For all we know, they could be using the same blog posts LazerPig cited in his original Armada video. Speaking of blog posts, LazerPig makes a bit of an error here when referring to one of the sources I used, which he accidentally attributes to Red Effect.
This article from warspot.ru, which is what Red Effect is using as a source, which he thinks is better than the other warspot.ru I'm sourcing because it has sources listed. Of course, I'm sure I don't need to explain that this is what would be considered a primary source, talking about current events, so it doesn't need to cite sources, whereas this is a secondary source talking about history, so it does. Those first two sources listed, by the way, those are LiveJournal posts, both of whom were co-authored by the same guy who wrote this blog, and links back to this article, which may have been written by the same guy back in 2011 on VK.com. VK.com is basically the Russian Facebook, so the source of the source is a Facebook post by himself.
This Warspot article, written by Dmitry Zaitsev, does indeed list a fairly comprehensive list of sources. Unfortunately, and I hope by oversight and not intent, LazerPig lies about where these sources lead. These two sources he has highlighted here are not LiveJournal posts as he claims. They are in fact interrogation reports from the 1940s, one of which I have here and will provide a link to below if you want to dig through it yourself. At the time of writing this, I cannot find the second source, but I have no reason to believe it is anything but genuine. The following criticism of Warspot by comparing them to topwar.ru is especially weird, given that Warspot is actually directly affiliated with Wargaming, the company behind World of Tanks and World of Warships, which LazerPig mentions he is happy to work with. Him claiming the topwar.ru article does not need to cite sources as it is referring to current events is also untrue, as it specifically discusses historical topics relating to the Armada, to which they provide no sources. Warspot is fairly well known in the tank community as being some of the more accurate information you can find online, especially when it comes to Soviet vehicles, so this attack on their credibility is not only wrong, but unwarranted. especially given the authors understand the importance of citing sources, which is a perfect segue to our next point.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
So I'm not going to list my sources, because if they want to critique me on what I found, if you want to critique me on what I found, I want both you and them to go through the same level of research and the same level of pain that me and the two people who agreed to help me also went through, because I have a sneaking suspicion that they won't.
Out of everything in this video, this is probably the single most unprofessional thing that LazerPig does. In his own words, he refers to himself as a qualified military historian, for which I am willing to trust you at your word that you are. Assuming this is indeed the case, though, this refusal to cite sources is not only petty, it is an outright disregard for the reason we as a society provide sources when it comes to academic discussions. The reason for providing sources is not to prove we did research. We do it so that anyone who watches or reads our work and happens to disagree with something we said can go and pick through those sources to either discredit the source or perhaps convince them that you have actually provided new information. For an example of this in action, I will use a fairly significant mistake I previously made regarding my original Panther 2 video. After releasing that video, I began to get comments both from viewers on YouTube as well as other researchers over Discord who pointed out that I was wrong in my video, and due to my inclusion of sources, they could point out exactly why. The book Panther and its variants contained outdated information. Had I not presented these sources, it would have made it much harder for these people to voice their criticisms in a way that both addressed the problems while also showing me what I did wrong. Thanks to that, I was able to remake the video with better sources and gained a valuable learning experience from it. This benefited not just me, but my viewers who now had a more accurate video about the tank. So please, LazerPig, I understand that my comment about you doing actual research was uncalled for, and you are probably offended by it, and rightfully so. I just ask that you remember that this is not about us scoring points against each other in an argument, but rather a legitimate academic discussion of a topic. By not providing links to the sources you used, it only does a disservice to yourself, as it leaves viewers with essentially two choices: to trust you outright, or to assume you are not showing your sources as you either do not have them, or they are not reliable sources. This only furthers the drama, as fans of our channels are driven against each other depending on who they believe. I want to give you the benefit of the doubt here, but your behavior towards me and actions like this make it incredibly hard to treat you as the qualified historian you say you are. I don't say this to discourage or discredit you, rather to point this out as it is an absolutely crucial part of being taken seriously as a historian. Imagine if I had done this in my response video to you. Instead of being able to view the material I used, whether you agree with it or not, you would be left with no options but to dig around online hoping that you found the same sources I used. Once again, this brings us to our next point.
Oh shit, here we go again.
So when it comes to the reality of is this an engine a copy of the SLA-16, the answer is probably yes. Obviously, it wouldn't be fair to call it a direct copy because it has been modified, further evolved from that original 1945 design. This obviously gets seized on by the Vacniks because any evidence that the engine has been modified, even if it's just a different colour, is obvious evidence that it's not the same engine, blah blah blah, etc etc, whine whine whine.
LazerPig makes it very clear in his response video that he is pretty sure that the A85-3 is a copy of the SLA-16. Although, as I said in my original video, I do not disagree that there could be some connections, calling it a copy shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how engines are designed, as well as a poor use of terminology. The use of the word copy leads the viewer to believe that these engines are at their core the same. The Chieftain makes a very good analogy to why this line of thinking can be a bit questionable with his Tank of Theseus example, so I think I will attempt to emulate it here. We start with the SLA-16, a 16-cylinder air-cooled diesel engine. Following the war, we eventually reach the connection that LazerPig theorizes proves they are the same with the early engines of the 2V16-2 family. Here once again we find an X 16-cylinder diesel engine, but it is now liquid-cooled. Converting an air-cooled engine to water-cooled isn't a simple process, but it can be done in theory with enough redesigning. As LazerPig says in his response, this was developed along with a smaller X12 engine of similar design, which would essentially become the A85-3, an X12 engine which is water-cooled. So yes, both the SLA-16 and the A85-3 share a similar piston layout, but the closer you look at them, the more differences you find with everything from the overall shape to the internals. With this taken into consideration, is this truly the same engine as the SLA-16? I think we can definitively say it is not. We cannot say that there is absolutely no relation to the SLA-16, with perhaps some design cues being taken from it after the war. However, I cannot say that I personally agree with this, as by the time you reverse engineered the SLA-16, you could have just built your own X engine. If you have further information which contradicts what I have said, please send it to me, but I feel that saying it most likely came from the SLA-16 is a bit of a stretch given what we know. Again though, none of this matters. With all the other problems you can point out in the Armada's design, choosing to go after something we do not have enough information on, such as the engine, in an attempt to make it appear even worse, just seems unnecessary. You can certainly address some things regarding to the engine design, such as it being the fairly unpopular and problematic X layout, or being Russia's first production power pack for a vehicle. So adding on largely unverified and dubious links to World War II German engines just seems like an exercise in futility. Just saying you do not believe the Russian sources or that you are confident enough to bet on it is not sufficient proof to say they are connected. If it were me, I would just remove that short section from the original video given the unverified nature of the claims. That pretty much concludes my gripes with the parts of the video concerning me, but I do have one final thing I want to touch on.
You are dead drunk.
So being taught to be critical of primary sources is a good first step, and I'm so happy that it's happening. The next step is getting these people to write books or start YouTube channels where they question these sources as opposed to falling back into the narrative.
This is not really a major point in the video, but it is something I absolutely had to touch on because it seems to be something LazerPig has been pushing both in his video and subsequent posts, that being to not trust primary sources, particularly those from the Soviet Union or Russia. While I do not disagree with this outright, as there is a grain of truth to that sentiment, I believe it is a gross overstatement. The issue lies in what type of primary source we are referring to, as anything from a trial document to a field report can be classified as a primary source. When it comes to something like a trials report, these are generally considered to be reliable information as they are relaying back data from the testing for consideration in the further development of the project. With something like a field report, these can be a bit more hit or miss, not just because the person writing it might exaggerate, but because they may not have all the details regarding a particular engagement. So in this case, you would want to check this alongside other documents or photos from the same battle in order to determine the accuracy of the information. So while it is okay to question a primary source, and having multiple sources which corroborate each other is always preferable, I think it is worth expanding on this topic to your audience about how and when to be critical of primary sources, as well as what a primary source actually is. I personally plan to do so in a future video discussing some of the ways I research my videos, as I agree it is something vitally important to correcting some of the long-standing myths within our history. The same line of thinking applies when we talk about Soviet and Russian sources. There are absolutely cases of these original documents being wrong either through poor intel or deception attempts. This does not apply to every single document in Russia or posted to a .ru website though. Part of doing research on these sorts of topics is examining the documents alongside other information you may have on the topic and drawing a conclusion from what they tell you. If something seems wildly off from the other sources you have, that is a detail to investigate further or disregard as likely inaccurate. It is very rare that documents from a foreign nation are more accurate to the design and development of a vehicle than those of the actual nation which created it. Overall, I think this entire situation has been poorly handled by all involved and has left the both of us with a sizable amount of pie on our face. As I mentioned at the start, the tone of my original video was absolutely a mistake, and I should have focused on the criticism of the information and not the person behind it. When it comes to LazerPig's response, I feel it was similarly poorly handled, with many mistakes and the same degree of unprofessionalism I displayed in my video. Whether he meant it or not, this resulted in the response implying that Red Effect and I are simply vatniks who rely on purely online sources. This is not the case, but has not stopped me from already being referred to as one by several individuals, among many other unkind comments which are not constructive to anyone. He also mistakes my criticism with the information he provided as a dislike for the more comedic style of his videos versus the more standard documentary style of content which I make. This is absolutely not how I feel, and I have absolutely no issue with that style of content. Clearly, it is something which has brought you success, and I hope it continues to bring you success. My issue was never with the content style, but rather with the information within them, as it is reaching millions of people, opening the door for at least some of them to be misinformed by any errors. This is something I feel we as creators need to take seriously, as we have the responsibility of doing so for our audience. This extends not just to the premise of the video, but to the individual details and the exaggerations for comedic effect. It's worth remembering that just because you understand something you say is exaggerated does not mean the person watching does. As I said before, I may not particularly enjoy your content myself, but that does not mean there is no place for you in the history community, as your channel's performance has clearly shown. Videos with an entertaining comedic twist to them does not mean they cannot be accurate, well-researched pieces. That is where you as the writer and researcher come in. One last thing I want to say directly to LazerPig, who I am assuming is watching this right now, and I mean this in a constructive way, not as a condescending statement. You will inevitably receive further criticisms on future videos you make, and that will more than likely include criticisms which are harsh or even downright mean. As we have both learned from this experience, that is far from pleasant. However, just because it is presented in this way does not necessarily mean it is wrong. Part of being a good creator and historian is being able to address that criticism and learn from it to improve every video you make. If the only way we respond to criticism is to attack the person giving it, we can quickly alienate potential viewers who get the wrong impression about us. I hope this experience can not just serve as a learning experience for me on how to properly format and present criticism, but also a learning experience for you on how to handle and address that criticism. As I said numerous times in this video, there were absolutely things you could have taken issue with in my delivery style, and I apologize for making it at all personal. I think it is fair to say, though, that there were problems with both your responses to the situation and in the original video itself, especially with how you bent much of what both I and Red Effect had to say within our videos, which I feel I have demonstrated in this video. With all that hopefully now over, I leave you all watching with this. If you would like me to remove the segment from my video regarding LazerPig, I will be willing to do so. Once again, I apologize to all of you for this situation even happening in the first place, and for how long this video will likely end up being. I know many of you probably did not want me to even make this response. I felt it was not something I could simply ignore though, as it has the potential to mislead you about my content and the attention I pay to making sure it is as accurate as I can make it. I want to emphasize that this video is not about winning any arguments, but rather providing missing context as well as source material which has been omitted. This will hopefully be the end of this now that everyone has said their piece. You can expect a return to normal content soon, as I already have some videos in the works for you all to enjoy. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I see you again under better circumstances.